Colleagues, before I go into the report, I have a very pleasant duty to perform. And if I tell a story first, one of the most pleasing aspects of getting old is the opportunity to look at young people coming through and identifying talent. And about 10 or 12 years ago, we had a nurse from St. Pat's who was a delegate at the NEC, and I was very impressed with her. And I said to Ned Larkham one day, we should keep a close eye on that young woman. She's very promising. And he said, I am keeping a very close eye on her. And later she joined the officer board. She became a full-time official of the INO, and she became Ned's partner, and they're getting married next month, or the following month, or whenever later in the summer anyway. And but that was one example of someone who just popped up, and it happens every so often. And in the last 18 months or 2 years, there's been a young man who's really impressed us. He's been hugely important in his own area of practice, and he's been very impressive. And he's done an awful lot of work in his county and in the Western Seaboard in terms of organisation. And I went over to his branch to a general meeting a few months ago, and I was really impressed with the way the branch was organised and with the membership. And we have been watching him and saying that this fellow can go an awful long way. Now, recently he's had his setbacks in the health area, and we wish him the very best going forward. But at this point, I'd like to call on our national chairman, Mr. Liam McNamara, to make a special presentation to Noel Giblin. Noel, you can get the microphone in a few minutes, okay? We'll give you time to collect your thoughts, and then we'll give you a chance to speak later on. In other words, he's not getting this microphone yet. Thanks, Noel. Mr. Chairman and delegates, colleagues, distinguished guests, in this, my 18th annual report to our 38th annual conference, I will trace not just the highs and lows of any annual report, but the disintegration of a once called Cinderella service to one that is now characterised by institutional neglect, denial, threat and deceit. A service in which HSE spokespersons are trained at the Academy of Public Relations, which perverts truth and delivers self-serving inaccuracies. I will start in reference to Vision for Change, the independent monitoring group established by government to oversee implementation of Vision for Change could hardly be described as a group unfriendly to or uncritical of the HSE or government. Yet their third report, published in the last few days, evidences their disappointment at the paucity of progress in modernising our services. And they call for, inter alia, the appointment of a dedicated leader of a National Mental Health Services Directorate, the prioritising of resources of mental health teams, or for mental health teams, the closure of mental hospitals, which was first called for nearly 30 years ago, and the transfer of the remaining patients to appropriate facilities. And they call on government to address as a matter of urgency the provision of regional forensic services and the provision of specialist mental health services to the intellectually disabled. They call for transparency in accounting for monies allocated to mental health, and they call for retention of current and capital resources in mental health for developing the service going forward. There is no doubt, colleagues, but that this report from a government and HSE-friendly agency is testament to institutional neglect on a grand scale. At conference in 2008, we were preparing for industrial action in relation to the compensation scheme. Some feared that the Minister and her stormtroopers would outwit the PNA. Indeed, many sensed that not just she, but her HSE managers would leave us out on strike for weeks, resolve the HSE's budgetary problems, and send us back to work with a patronising pat on the head and tell us to keep heads down for the next 20 years. It didn't evolve that way. On the morning of the action, they told us we could not pull overtime. We just had. They said it would be better if we were to go on strike. We agreed, better for them. They tried to reassure their frantic local managers that after the first few days we would actually go on strike, that the strike committees would take over running of the hospitals and everything would be okay again. On a personal level, I did take some pleasure from the discomfort of the managers, but more so the frustration of their seniors. Tomorrow our chairman will deal in more detail with the success of the campaign. Today I want to identify or to deal with two issues. One is the individual understanding and knowledge of the scheme, which is important for every nurse, and two, the failure to implement the revised scheme for nurses injured by assault at work, or the indemnity scheme in some areas. We are currently finalising a booklet setting out all details of the scheme relevant to the assaulted nurse, and this booklet will be circulated to every member and future members. However, for some nurses, their injuries will be so serious that only a claim to the courts will be sufficient to ensure adequate compensation, and here again our booklet will set out the appropriate advice. It is essential that every nurse receives a copy and keeps it safe in the event that it is needed. Now, during the past year, we have noticed a failure in some areas to properly apply the indemnity scheme, with nurses being off sick, trying to recover from their injuries and their salaries reduced, despite their entitlements under the scheme. In Kerry, the problem was isolated to a local manager who failed to complete the relevant approval forms. In Limerick, similar problems have arisen, and these have been put down to bureaucratic errors. Consider the unfortunate nurse. He or she is assaulted. Perhaps her nose and teeth are broken, her face is swollen, her person violated. She expects support from management. Instead, she is penalised. My position on this is unequivocal. In those branches where we are experiencing problems, we should carry out precautionary ballots for industrial action. If a nurse is not paid her premiums, we should serve notice of action re breach of agreement. We just cannot leave assaulted and injured nurses to the whims of bad managers. Colleagues, the current environment is horrendous. I'd like to say we've been here before, but we haven't. We've never seen anything like this. Yet life goes on. And we know that the current crisis will not continue indefinitely. And as a trade union, we must continue to work for our membership, including the processing of claims, even if in some cases the benefits, if successful, are delayed in implementation. And I'll deal with a few of them now. Regularising of nurses in long-term acting posts. In 2005, we reached agreement with the HSEA that any nurse acting as an ADON, in circumstances where the post was actually vacant, the person was assigned to the post through competition, and the nurse took up the post before the 1st of January 2004, that the appointment could be regularised. That is, nurses could be appointed to the post without further competition. Subsequently, this formula was used to process claims on behalf of a number of actors at other levels. In 2008, we noted that a number of nurses had been placed on panels for appointment to promotional posts, yet in many cases the nurses were left as actors and being paid an acting allowance instead of being appointed. We also noted that Circular 1 of 2008 was being used as an excuse for not processing nurses for appointment, leaving posts vacant long term with a consequential build-up of numbers of temporary nurses.